Ingrid Halvorsen was digging a hole behind her soddy when Constance Fairweather rode up in her husband's wagon and asked her what in God's name she thought she was doing. "Digging," Ingrid said, not stopping, not looking up. The shovel bit into the prairie soil, and she lifted another load of earth onto the growing pile beside the hole. "I can see that. But why? That hole is 8 feet deep already. You're not building a well. There's no water there. You're not digging a cellar. You already have one." Constance climbed down from the wagon, her iron-gray hair catching the October wind. "The women in town are concerned about you, Ingrid. They say you've been digging for 2 weeks. They say you've stopped attending church. They say you might be what? Losing your grip on account of Eric." Ingrid drove the shovel into the earth and leaned on the handle, finally looking at the woman who had appointed herself the conscience of the settlement. "I'm building a bedroom, Mrs. Fairweather, underground, for me and my daughters." The silence that followed was the particular silence of someone who has just heard something impossible. "An underground bedroom," Constance repeated. "That's right. You're going to sleep in a hole in the ground, like an animal, like a savage. Like someone who wants her children to survive the winter." Ingrid pulled the shovel free and went back to digging. "Your concern is noted. You can go now." Constance didn't go. She stood at the edge of the hole and watched Ingrid work, her face cycling through confusion and disgust, and something that might have been pity. "Your husband built you a perfectly good soddy. 4 walls, a roof, a stove. Why would you abandon it to sleep in dirt?" "I'm not abandoning the soddy. I'm adding to it. The bedroom will be underneath, connected by a ladder. During the day, we'll live upstairs. At night and during storms, we'll sleep below." "That's madness. The cold will seep up from the ground. You'll freeze faster underground than you would above it." Ingrid stopped digging again and looked at Constance with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. "The ground doesn't get cold, Mrs. Fairweather. Not deep down. 6 feet below the surface, the earth stays the same temperature all year round. 54 degrees in summer, 54 degrees in winter. It doesn't matter if it's 100 above or 40 below. Down there, it's always 54. That's impossible. It's the way the earth works. Ask anyone who's dug a deep well or worked in a mine. The deeper you go, the more stable the temperature becomes. My daughters will sleep in 54-degree ground while your family shivers around a stove that can't keep up with the wind." Constance's face hardened into the expression of someone who has been contradicted and doesn't like it. "I'll pray for you, Mrs. Halvorsen, and for those poor girls who have no one to protect them from their mother's foolishness." She climbed back into the wagon and drove away, and Ingrid went back to digging, carving out the underground room that everyone said was madness. Preparing for a winter that no one else seemed to understand was coming. Eric Halvorsen had drowned in September, pulled under by the current while trying to recover a wagon that had broken loose during the river crossing. They had been 3 days from their claim, 3 days from the land they had filed on, 3 days from the life they had planned to build together. Ingrid had watched from the bank, holding their twin daughters, as the river took her husband and didn't give him back. She had buried him on the prairie, in ground she would have to leave behind because the claim was in his name, and she didn't have the money to file her own. The other settlers had expected her to turn around, go back to Minnesota, find her family, or another husband or some other future that didn't involve a widow alone on the Nebraska prairie with 2 4-year-old girls. But the land agent in town had told her something the others didn't know. A widow could inherit her husband's claim if she improved it before spring. All she had to do was survive the winter on the land, make it clear she intended to stay, and the claim would pass to her. Fail, and the land would go back to the government, available for anyone else to file on. She intended to survive, and surviving meant preparing for a winter that the other settlers, most of them new to the prairie, didn't yet understand could kill them. Old Silas found her 2 days after Constance's visit, riding up on a horse that looked as weathered as he did, his white mustache catching the light as he peered down into the hole she had dug. "That's a fine excavation," he said. "You planning to live down there? Sleep down there during storms and at night?" Ingrid climbed out of the hole, her arms aching from the work. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone hasn't spent 30 winters on this prairie." Silas dismounted and walked the perimeter of the hole, examining the walls, the depth, the angle of the entrance she had begun to carve. 54 degrees, more or less. Same as a root cellar, same as a mine shaft. The earth holds its temperature regardless of what the air does above. You understand. I understand that the winter of 64, I survived a 3-week blizzard in a buffalo wallow I dug out and roofed with hides. Stayed at 52 degrees the whole time, while men in cabins froze around fires they couldn't keep lit. He looked at her with eyes that had seen more death than she could imagine. "You're doing it right, but you need to do it better." "Better how?" "The entrance. You've got it angled straight down, which means cold air will fall into the room like water into a barrel. Angle it sideways, then down, so the cold air has to work to find its way in. And put a door at the top and another at the bottom. 2 layers of barrier instead of 1. Like an airlock. Like a prairie woman who knows that cold air sinks and warm air rises, and uses that knowledge instead of fighting it. Stay with me, because what old Silas taught her is the reason Ingrid's underground bedroom stayed 54 degrees, while the blizzard above dropped the temperature to 38 below. The construction took 6 weeks, working every daylight hour, racing against the calendar. The main chamber was 12 feet square and 7 feet deep, carved out of prairie soil that was surprisingly easy to dig once you got past the root-tangled surface layer. The walls were reinforced with scrap lumber salvaged from a collapsed barn 15 miles south, creating a wooden shell inside the earthen cavity that would hold its shape through seasons of freezing and thawing. The entrance was a tunnel, angled exactly as Silas had described, horizontal for 4 feet, then sloping down at a gentle angle for another 6 feet before opening into the main chamber. The first door was at the surface, a heavy wooden hatch covered with sod to match the surrounding ground. The second door was at the bottom of the tunnel, where it opened into the bedroom, a lighter door of canvas stretched over a wooden frame. The floor was raised 6 inches on a platform of logs, creating an air gap that added insulation and kept the sleeping area above any water that might seep in. Ingrid covered the platform with straw, then canvas, then the quilts she had brought from Minnesota, creating a bed large enough for herself and both daughters. The ceiling was the most critical element. She laid logs across the top of the chamber, close together, then covered them with a layer of canvas, then 6 inches of straw, then 2 feet of sod cut from the prairie. The weight of the earth above compressed everything below, creating a roof that was both insulated and load-bearing, strong enough to support a person standing above without any sign that there was a room beneath. She moved the essentials down in early November: quilts, a lantern, a small store of food, a chamber pot, the wooden box that held her husband's letters, and the lock of each daughter's hair. The main soddy would remain her daytime living space, with its stove and its window and its connection to the world above. But the underground room would be her refuge, the place where the prairie winter couldn't reach her. Constance Farweathers came to inspect the finished work on November 15th, arriving with 2 other settler women, all of them wearing expressions of Christian concern. "We heard you'd finished your project," Constance said, standing at the edge of the hidden entrance, looking down at the sod-covered hatch. "We wanted to see it for ourselves." Ingrid opened the hatch and gestured into the tunnel. "You're welcome to go down." None of them moved. They stood at the edge of the hole and looked into the darkness below, and something in their faces suggested that the underground bedroom had become, in their minds, something more than just foolish. It had become frightening, foreign, a rejection of everything they believed about how civilized people should live. "You're going to raise your daughters down there," Constance said, "in a hole in the ground, like animals. I'm going to keep my daughters alive down there, which is more than some of you will manage when the real cold comes." "The real cold," Constance laughed, a sound without humor. "It's November, Mrs. Halverson. We've had cold before. We've survived it." "You've survived Minnesota cold. Prairie cold is different. Prairie cold comes with wind that doesn't stop for days, snow that buries houses to the roof line, temperatures that freeze the spit in your mouth before it hits the ground." Ingrid looked at the women who had come to judge her and felt something shift in her chest. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of cold certainty. "When the blizzard comes, and it will, you'll huddle around your stoves and pray they don't burn through your wood before the storm passes. I'll be 54 degrees and comfortable, waiting for you to realize I was right." The women left without going underground. They left without saying anything kind. They left believing that Ingrid Halverson had lost her mind with grief and would be dead by spring, and that the kindest thing they could do was pray for her soul while they waited. The blizzard came on January 12th, 1874, rolling down from Canada like a white wall that swallowed the horizon. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 hours. The wind rose to 60 miles an hour and stayed there. The snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and it fell for 5 days without stopping. Ingrid saw it coming. She had been watching the sky all morning, reading the signs that old Silas had taught her. The halo around the sun, the way the cattle faced south, the particular quality of the cold that meant something worse was on its way. By noon, she had moved herself and the twins into the underground bedroom, sealing the hatches behind them, lighting the lantern, settling into the space she had spent 6 weeks preparing. They stayed down there for 5 days. The chamber was dark except for the lantern, which Ingrid kept burning low to conserve oil. It was quiet except for the muffled howl of the wind above, a sound so distant it might have been a dream. And it was warm, not warm like summer, but warm like a root cellar, warm like the earth itself. 54 degrees regardless of what the weather did above. The twins adapted faster than Ingrid expected. At 4 years old, they didn't understand the danger, didn't know that the storm above would have killed them in minutes if they had been caught in it. They played quiet games in the lamplight, slept curled together under the quilts, ate the food their mother had stored, and didn't complain about the darkness. They were warm and safe and together, and that was enough. On the 3rd day, Ingrid heard something above, a pounding on the hatch, barely audible through the layers of sod and snow. She climbed the tunnel and pushed against the upper door, expecting resistance, finding it. The snow had piled 4 feet deep over the entrance, and she had to dig upward before she could see daylight. A man was standing in the white chaos above, bundled in so many layers he was barely recognizable as human. It was Thomas Farweather, Constance's husband, his face red with cold and fear. "We need help," he shouted over the wind. "Our stovepipe cracked, the cabin filled with smoke. Constance and the children, they're in the barn, but the barn won't hold much longer." Ingrid didn't hesitate. She pushed the hatch open wider and gestured into the tunnel. "Bring them, quickly." Thomas Farweather brought his wife and their 3 children into the underground bedroom, descending the tunnel one by one, stumbling into the chamber where Ingrid's twins sat watching with curiosity. Constance looked around at the earthen walls, the lantern light, the quilts on the raised platform, and something in her face collapsed. Not into gratitude, not yet, but into the realization that she had been wrong about everything. "It's warm," she said. Her voice was hoarse from smoke and cold. "How is it warm?" 54 degrees, Ingrid said. "Same as it's been since November, same as it will be until spring." They stayed together for the last 2 days of the blizzard, 8 people in a room meant for 3, cramped and uncomfortable, but alive. The Farweather children played with the Halverson twins. Thomas Farweather sat in silence, staring at the walls, calculating what it would cost to build a room like this under his own house. And Constance Farweather said almost nothing, but she watched Ingrid with new eyes, seeing something she had missed before. On the 6th day, the storm broke. The wind died, the snow stopped falling, and the sun came out over a prairie transformed into a white sea. Ingrid climbed out first, pushing through the drift that had buried the entrance, standing in the dazzling brightness of the aftermath. The world had changed. Drifts rose 20 feet high against the sides of buildings. The horizon was blank, every landmark buried, every familiar shape erased. She could see smoke rising from some chimneys in the distance, but others were dark, and she knew without asking what that darkness meant. 6 families lost members in that blizzard, men and women who had run out of fuel, who had tried to reach their barns and gotten lost, who had trusted their cabins to keep them warm and found that trust betrayed. The children's blizzard, they would call it later, because so many of the lost were young, caught at school or in fields when the storm came. But Ingrid's daughters were alive. The Farweather family was alive, and they were alive because a widow had dug a hole in the ground that everyone said was madness. Constance came to see Ingrid 2 weeks after the blizzard, riding alone this time, without her Christian concern or her iron-gray judgment. She stood at the edge of the underground entrance and looked at the woman she had mocked. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words came slowly, as if they cost her something to speak. "I owe you more than that. I owe you my children's lives." Ingrid said nothing. "You were right, and I was wrong. The earth keeps its temperature. The underground room was warmer than any cabin. The prairie winter is worse than anything I knew." Constance paused, her breath visible in the cold air. "I told everyone you were crazy. I told everyone you would die. Instead, you saved my family while I nearly killed them with my own stubbornness." "What do you want, Mrs. Farweather?" "I want you to teach me. I want to learn how to build what you built, so that next winter, when the blizzard comes, and it will come again, I won't have to beg shelter from the woman I mocked." Ingrid looked at the woman who had tried to shame her, who had prayed for her foolish soul, who had expected her to fail in every possible way, and she made a decision that surprised them both. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you." They built 6 underground bedrooms that spring, Ingrid directing the work, teaching the settlers what old Silas had taught her. The chambers were carved into the prairie, reinforced with timber, covered with sod, connected to the houses above by angled tunnels that kept the cold air from falling in. By the following winter, a quarter of the settlement had refuge from the storms that would come. Old Silas died in the summer of 1874, peacefully, in a bed above ground that he had never trusted as much as the earth below. Ingrid was with him at the end, holding the hand of the man who had shown her how to survive. "You did good," he said, "better than I expected. I had a good teacher. You had a starting point. The rest you built yourself." He smiled, his weathered face softening. "The earth keeps its counsel, girl. It always has. We're just the ones smart enough to listen." Ingrid Halvorsen proved up her claim in the spring of 1874, the widow who had survived when everyone expected her to fail. She raised her twin daughters on that land, taught them to read the sky and respect the cold, showed them the underground room where they had waited out the storm that had killed so many others. She remarried in 1876, a railroad surveyor named James McNally, who had heard about the woman with the underground bedroom and wanted to meet her. They had 3 more children together, all of them born in the soddy above, but raised with the knowledge of the room below, the refuge that was always waiting when the weather turned. The original underground bedroom is still there, collapsed now, but marked with a stone that the Historical Society placed in 1952. The marker says, "Site of Pioneer Storm Shelter, built by Ingrid Halvorsen McNally, 1873. It doesn't mention Constance Farweathers, or the scoffing, or the 5 days when a widow and her twins shared their refuge with the family that had mocked them. It doesn't mention old Silas, who knew the earth kept its counsel and passed that knowledge to someone who would use it. It doesn't mention the blizzard that killed 6 families while 8 people stayed warm in a hole in the ground. But the earth remembers. It still holds 54 degrees, 6 feet down, regardless of what the sky does above. And somewhere in Nebraska, there are probably still families who know what Ingrid knew, that sometimes the best way to survive the storm is to go beneath it, to let the prairie keep you warm while the wind exhausts itself above. Some stories end with the protagonist defeating the villain. This one ends with something deeper. A woman who dug into the earth and found that it would hold her, who taught her mockers to save themselves, who survived not by fighting the winter, but by understanding it. If this story of underground warmth resonated with you, consider subscribing for more narratives of buried wisdom. What is the underground bedroom in your own life? The strange solution that everyone dismisses until the storm comes? And what would happen if you started digging?